وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. So the last lesson we were on the section concerning the weighing scales, and we discussed some of the points relating to the weighing scales and the balance. And the first point was that this is a real weighing scale which has two sides to it, two balances. And when the deeds are put into these balances, then one becomes heavier and one becomes light. So it has the same characteristics of the balance or the weighing scale that we know of. And then the second issue was, and then we mentioned some of the evidences concerning the weighing scale and its existence. And then we mentioned the biggest issue in the section, which was concerning what will actually be weighed. And so there were several opinions concerning what will be weighed. The first of them was that the books or the records themselves will be weighed. The records which have the writings of the people on them, their deeds, their goods and their evils. The second opinion was that the actions themselves are going to be weighed. The third opinion was that the person himself will be weighed. The fourth opinion was a combination between these previous opinions, that sometimes the books will be weighed and alongside it might be the person himself or his actions also. And the fifth and the sixth opinion, which were the weak opinions, was that the fifth one being that the action and the person himself, the actions and the person will be weighed. And the final opinion was that the person and his books or his deeds will be weighed. And these two were weak opinions, and the strongest opinion was the collection of the first three, which is that the books and the deeds, they will be weighed, and sometimes the person himself might be weighed along with that, and sometimes the actions might also be weighed. Then concerning the weighing of the actions, we mentioned the several things which are linked to the actions, and what are those items or those things which a person can benefit from in terms of his actions. And the first was everything that he does himself in his lifetime, and that which is from sadaqah jariyah, and then also the things which are given to him in terms of dua, that a person makes dua for that person. Not that he makes dua via that person or intercession, but that he makes dua for that person, asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive that person. Similarly, sadaqah, charity, giving a charity on behalf of that person. Similarly, doing hajj or umrah on behalf of that person, and also making up the obligatory fasts on behalf of that person. And then there was also the issue of the one who was oppressed in this lifetime and he wasn't given back his right by the oppressor. Then on the Day of Judgment, the right will be taken from the oppressor to the oppressed. So the oppressed will be given his right, either by taking some of the good deeds of the one who oppressed him, or if the one who oppressed him doesn't have any good deeds, then some of the evil deeds from the one who was oppressed will be taken from him and put onto the one who oppressed him. Then we mentioned some of the actions which specifically are linked to the weighing scales becoming heavy. Some of the actions that have a big impact on the weighing scale. And they were, firstly, tawheed, that a person, he's upon tawheed, that this is the biggest effect on the weighing scale in making it heavy for a person in terms of his good deeds. Then there were statements and actions like saying the statement of Alhamdulillah and Subhanallah. And then we mentioned the hadith concerning good manners. Then the issue that we left it off at was concerning the states of the people when it comes to the balance of the weighing scales. And those are three situations. One, that a person, his good deeds are heavier than his evil deeds. And the second, his evil deeds are heavier than his good deeds. And the third being that they are equal, his evil deeds and his good deeds. So as for the first situation where his good deeds are better than his evil deeds, then as the scholars have said, then this person is the one who enters the paradise directly without any previous punishment. And the evidence for that is the ayat in the Quran, from amongst them, فَأَمَّا مَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَهُوَ فِي عِيشَةٍ رَاضِيَةٍ Al-Qari'ah 6 and 7. That the one whose balance or his weighing scale becomes heavy, i.e. with his good deeds, then he is the one who is in فِي عِيشَةٍ رَاضِيَةٍ, i.e. the paradise. He is the one who is in the paradise. Then there was the issue of what if a person's good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, but his bad deeds, some of them are major sins. And this is where we left it off. That a person whose good deeds are heavier than his evil deeds, then he's going to go to paradise, but without any punishment prior to that. But what if his good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, but his bad deeds, some of them are major sins? Will they be left alone, or do they have to have some sort of punishment for those major sins that he committed? The opinion of the scholars, which is the correct opinion, is that even if that person has major sins in his bad deeds, as long as his good deeds are heavier, and he goes directly to paradise without any prior punishment. There are some people though who stated or took the opinion that that person is going to be under taht al-mashi'ah, that he's going to be under the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who has major sins in amongst his bad deeds, even though his good deeds were heavier. And this is a weak opinion, it's not the correct opinion. The scholars, they took the opinion that even if the person has major sins in his bad deeds, as long as his good deeds are heavier, he will go to paradise directly. And there are several reasons for that. One is, as we mentioned, the consensus of the scholars on this. There's ijma' on this issue, that the one who has good deeds heavier than his bad deeds, he is going to go directly to paradise. As the ayah says in the Quran, the ayat in the Quran, that whoever's good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, then he goes to paradise. The second evidence, so the first evidence is the consensus. The second evidence is the ayat in the Quran. That the ayat in the Quran, they stated that a person whose deeds are heavier than whose good deeds are heavier than his evil deeds, he will go directly to paradise. And there was no mention of the kaba'ir. There was no mention or specification that the person whose deeds are heavier, his good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, then that person goes to paradise only if he doesn't have any major sins in his bad deeds. This was never mentioned, and it was never stated in the ayat. So the ayat are general, and so they are left upon their generality, that a person whose good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, even if he has major sins in his bad deeds, then he goes directly to paradise without any prior punishment. And the third evidence, also indicating this, that a person goes directly to paradise even though he has major sins, is that the people, and this will come later on, that there are the third group of people are the ones whose good deeds and bad deeds were equal, exactly equal. Neither were their good deeds any better than their bad deeds, nor were their bad deeds any worse than their good deeds. They were totally equal. And for those people, it's known from the sunnah that they're not going to go to the hellfire. The one who, on the day of judgment, when he's resurrected, his good deeds and his bad deeds are exactly equal. Those people won't go to the hellfire. They'll go to a place called Araf, and then they'll go to paradise. So the scholars said, if that's the case, that a person whose good deeds and evil deeds are exactly the same, he's not going to go to hellfire, he's just going to go to Araf, and then he's going to go to the paradise, then it can't be that somebody whose good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds is going to have to face any type of punishment, even if he's got major sins in there. Because he's better than the one whose deeds were equal. This one has got good deeds more than his bad deeds. So this one, they said, is another evidence. It's like qiyas, is another evidence that the person whose good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, he will go directly to paradise, even if he has major sins on the other side. Then the Shaykh mentioned that the people who, this first category of people, the ones whose good deeds are heavier than their bad deeds, then there are levels and they have different ranks. So some of the people, they're going to have totally good deeds. All of their deeds will be good and they won't have anything on the bad side. Their weighing scale will be totally 100% heavy on the good side. And they are like the prophets and the messengers. The prophets and the messengers, they will have only good deeds. And as for the errors, that the smaller mistakes that fell from some of them or from the righteous people, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed them to make tawbah from those mistakes. So the prophets and the messengers, even though they had mistakes, the smaller mistakes is the correct opinion, that they can fall into the sagha'ir. Then if they ever did fall into any of that, or any of that occurred, then as a scholar said, they immediately made tawbah from those things. So from that, then the messengers and the prophets, then they are going to have complete good deeds and they're going to not have any bad deeds. So they will be at the highest of the rank. Then there will be the righteous people, who the majority of their deeds were the good deeds, and even perhaps they're totally good deeds, because all of their bad deeds, they made tawbah from them before they died. So if they made tawbah from them before they died, those evil deeds won't be counted on their bad side. So some people will be like this, where their good deeds are heavily outweighing their bad deeds, and the majority of their deeds are the good deeds. And these are the people who are going to be in the highest ranks. Then there are those people who have good deeds, but their bad deeds, they have several bad deeds also, because they never repented from those deeds before dying. So they have sins on their other side which they never repented from. So these people will be in a lower rank than those people who had the majority of their deeds as good deeds. Like for example, if you think of it in percentage terms, there could be somebody who has 99 or 98% good deeds and only 2% bad deeds. He's obviously in a higher rank than a person who has 60% good deeds and 40% bad deeds, even though both of them will go to paradise, because even the one who has 60-40 still has more better good deeds than bad deeds. But the one who has 98 or 99 compared to 1 or 2 on the other side is better and higher in rank than this one. So the Shaykh said the people are different ranks, even though they're all going to go to paradise because their good deeds are heavier, but their level of their good deeds being heavier will differ. Some people will be very high up in terms of a lot of good deeds, and others will have lesser good deeds, but it will still be more than their bad deeds. Then the next issue is a person who then has these good deeds. His good deeds are heavier. We're still in the first category of the people whose good deeds will be heavier than their evil deeds. a person whose good deeds are heavier than their evil deeds, those evil deeds, those evil actions that he had, are they going to have any effect on his good actions? Meaning that, for example, a person now on his weighing scale, on his balance, he has X amount of good deeds. For example, just if you think of it percentage-wise, just as terms, just to understand it, he has, for example, 80% good deeds and 20% evil actions on the other side of the weighing scale. Is that 20% going to have an effect on his good deeds in terms of his rank? Like, do you have to balance them out? Do you have to take away some of his good deeds in order to wipe out those 20% of bad deeds? Just like the person who was oppressed. The one who oppressed the other person, you take from his good deeds and give them to the one who was oppressed to give his right back. So it's like this. Do they have to be balanced out? This is the issue. A person whose good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, those bad deeds, do they have to be wiped out and balanced out by taking away some of his good deeds and therefore reducing his rank? So for example, again, percentage-wise, just to understand it, person has 80% good deeds, 20% bad deeds. Do you then have to take away, for example, 20% of his good deeds to leave him with 60 good deeds only and no bad deeds? Those bad deeds, do they take away from his good deeds before going into paradise to balance out the evil deeds that he did? The first opinion is that happens, that will happen. That the person, the category of people whose good deeds were heavier than their evil actions, then those evil actions will have to be accounted for. And the way to account for them is to reduce some of his good deeds. Then that will obviously reduce his rank and status on the Day of Judgment. Because some of his good deeds will have to be removed or reduced in order to balance out and to wipe out these evil deeds. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is similar to that. It says yes, that the bad deeds again have to be accounted for. And they have to be accounted for and balanced out, and they're going to be accounted for and balanced out by taking some of the good deeds and therefore reducing from the rank of the person. But they said only those bad deeds which are major sins. So the difference between the first and the second is they both say that the balancing and the accountability has to occur between the good and bad deeds. That the bad deeds, even though the person has 80 or 90% good deeds, that 10% or 20% or 30% of his bad deeds, something has to be done in order to balance out the affair. You can't just leave these bad deeds with that person and he goes to paradise. But the first group said all types of his bad deeds have to be accounted for, and you have to take from his good deeds and reduce his rank. The second group said only the major sins. So a person has, for example, numbers just to make it clear, a person has 10 good deeds and 5 bad deeds. And from amongst those 5 bad deeds, one of them is a major sin. So he has 4 small sins and 1 major sin. They said that this 1 major sin has to be accounted for. And you have to take away some of his good deeds in order to account for this major sin. But the first group of people, they said all 5 of those. A person who has 10 good deeds, 5 bad deeds, and from amongst those 5 is 1 major sin. They didn't differentiate. They said all 5 of these deeds, whether it's major or small, they have to be accounted for. So that's the only difference between the first and the second opinion. The first one accounts for all of the sins. The second one only accounts for the major sins. And the second one is the opinion of Ibn Rajab. The third opinion, which is the opinion of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he said that this doesn't occur. That as long as the person, his good deeds are heavier than his bad deeds, then there is no differentiation, there is no balancing out or accountability for those evil deeds. That person, those evil deeds will not have an effect in reducing the person's rank or level in paradise. And Shaykh Salih Sindi, from these 3 opinions, which one seems stronger? What do you think? If you say Ibn Qayyim's opinion is stronger, yeah, then that means somebody, look at him percentage-wise again, somebody who had 99% good deeds, 1% bad deeds. So his good deeds are heavier. He goes to paradise. Some other man comes along, he has 51% good deeds, 49% bad deeds. But his good deeds are heavy, he goes to paradise. So are you going to say their rank are exactly the same? Their ranks are different because this one, he had far more better deeds than the other one. But there's no rajih. Shaykh Salih Sindi said it's extremely difficult to come to a conclusion on which one of these opinions is correct on this issue. There's just not enough evidences and things in the Sunnah to come to a conclusion as to what will happen with those bad deeds. Remember, all of this is concerning the one whose good deeds were heavier than his bad deeds. What happens to those bad deeds? Shaykh Salih Sindi said there's nothing that you can really pinpoint out that it's going to be like this or it's going to be like this.
I think, you know, you said if they have more good deeds, that means you said that they go straight to paradise. I mean, they don't suffer for the bad deeds that they commit.
Yeah, they don't. This is the opinion of the scholars, the correct opinion. On the weighing scale, if your good deeds turn out to be heavier than your bad deeds, then you go to paradise. There's no punishment for those evil deeds. And those evidences in the Quran, that whoever's good deeds are heavier, then he will be in paradise. And there's no mention of him being punished beforehand. And that other evidence they used, the people who are exactly equal, 50-50, good deeds, bad deeds, 50-50. If on that day, and we'll come to that in a second in the next section, but on that day, if you're good and you're bad are exactly the same, 50 and 50, you don't go to the hellfire. You're not punished for that 50% of evil. You go to a particular place which isn't the hellfire, and you stay there for a while, then you go to paradise. So if that's the case with somebody who's 50-50, then surely somebody who's got 60-40 or 70-30, then he goes directly to paradise. He's not going to get punished either. The second group, then, the category of people is whose evil deeds are heavier than their good deeds. Whose evil deeds are heavier than their good deeds. Shaykh Salih Sindi, he didn't take any of them. Shaykh Salih Sindi said that this particular issue, you can't pinpoint anything out. It is difficult to go towards any one of these opinions, just because there isn't enough in the Sunnah to like evidences for any of these, all of these opinions. And he left it like that. He says, "Al-mas'ala la qati' fiha." That's what he said. He goes, this issue doesn't have anything which is definitive. It doesn't have anything which is definitive. There's nothing definitive in this mas'ala, in this issue. So that's concerning the people whose good deeds are heavier than their bad deeds. The second category are the people whose bad deeds are heavier than their good deeds. So on that day when the balance is done, then their bad deeds will be heavier than their good deeds. Concerning these people, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he said, وَهُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْلِمُونَ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُم. We're talking about the Muslims here. Kuffar will come to them in a second, but these are Muslims. When the Muslims, their deeds are weighed on the Day of Judgment, then the Muslims whose evil deeds are heavier than their good deeds, he says, فَهَذِهِ الطَّبْقَةَ الَّتِي اخْتَلَفَتْ فِيهَا أَقَاوِيلَ النَّاسِ. For this category of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah says, this category of people, the Muslims whose evil deeds are heavier than their good deeds, then the scholars have differed about them, what will happen to them. وَكَثُرَ فِيهَا خَوْضُهُم. And the scholars, they discussed this a lot, and there was a lot of discussion and talk on this issue of what will happen to these Muslims whose evil deeds are greater than their bad deeds, greater than their good deeds. وَتَشَعَّبَتْ مَذَاهِبُهُم. And the opinions that people took and the methodologies that people took on this, then they were very different and separated. وَتَشَتَّتْ آرَاؤُهُم. And their opinions were very separated and different and differing in regards to this issue. So basically two main opinions about the Muslims whose bad deeds are heavier than their good deeds. One group of people, they said, or one group of the scholars, they said, and it's many of them, they said these people will be under the mashia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, under the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who's a Muslim whose bad deeds are heavier than his good deeds on that day, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this person is under the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah allows to forgive him and send him to paradise anyway, he'll go to paradise. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to punish him for that, because his bad deeds are heavier than his good deeds, then he'll go to the hellfire. This is what one group of them said. That the issue is tahta al-mashi'ah, under the will or the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He does as he pleases. If he wants to punish him, he punishes him. If he wants to send him to paradise, he sends him to paradise. Another group of the scholars, they said that this person, the one whose bad deeds are heavier than his good deeds, he will definitely enter the hellfire. He will definitely go to the hellfire for a certain amount of time, if his bad deeds turn out to be heavier than his good deeds on the weighing scale. But obviously he won't stay in there forever. We're talking about the Muslims now. A Muslim who had that tawheed in his heart, if his bad deeds were greater than his evil deeds, the second group of scholars, they said he will definitely go to the fire for a certain amount of time and not stay in there forever, for a certain amount of time, and then he'll come out of the fire. And this opinion, Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Sa'di took this opinion, and other scholars, they took this opinion, and even Shaykh Salih Sindi, he says that this is the most closer opinion to be correct, the most just of the opinions, that a person who has the evil deeds greater than his good deeds, then he will go to the fire for a certain amount of time, and then he'll exit and go to the paradise. Shaykh Abdurrahman Sa'di and Shaykh Salih Sindi, when he explained it, they both were leaning towards this opinion. This is the correct opinion. The person whose balance is heavier on his evil deeds will spend some time in the fire as a consequence of that before going to the paradise. But like at the beginning of it, like the Shaykh said, this is something that the scholars have differed about and explained and talked about and had many discussions about what will happen to them. But this is just what Shaykh Abdurrahman Sa'di and Shaykh Salih Sindi, they both took this opinion or went closer to this opinion, leaned towards this opinion, that person will have to go to the hellfire for a certain amount of time until he is removed of those sins and then goes to the paradise. And this is because like we said, on the Day of Judgment, the stages are several stages. Different things happen. And it could be that when the person is resurrected, a particular person is resurrected, and at the time of his resurrection, he has more evil deeds than his good deeds. But as he goes through the stages of the Day of Judgment, then certain types of like we mentioned, the shafa'ah, maybe the shafa'ah occurs for him, and some of his things are reduced, some of his sins are reduced. Or maybe there was a person, for example, who had 51-49 percentage, just to understand it, and then when he gets to that bit where the judgment is made, and there was a person who oppressed him and he gets some of his deeds, then it becomes heavier for him. So maybe a person starts off sometimes being from those people whose bad deeds are heavier than his good deeds, but as he goes through the stages of the Day of Judgment, then as a consequence of the difficulties of the day, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives for him some of his sins, and as a consequence of Allah's mercy, and as a consequence of the intercessions that occur, then eventually before the person gets to the weighing scale, he might actually end up in a position where he doesn't have his bad deeds heavier than his good deeds anyway. But the one, after going through all of that stage, gets to the balance and the weighing scale, and his bad deeds are heavier than his good deeds, then what Shaykh Abdurrahman Sa'adi leans towards, he says that that person will definitely have to go to the fire for a period of time before going to the paradise. The third group of people are the ones whose good deeds and bad deeds were exactly equal. When they were measured in the weighing scale, their goods and their bads were exactly equal. And these people, they are going to go to a place called Al-A'raf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Surah Al-A'raf, from ayah number 46 to 49 in Surah Al-A'raf. We'll just read the translation of it. 46 to 49, the meanings of the translation. It says, and between them will be a barrier screen, and on Al-A'raf, a wall with elevated places, will be men whose good and evil deeds would be equal in scale. Their goods and their evils were exactly the same. Who would recognize all of the paradise and the hell, the people of the paradise and the hell, by their marks, and the dwellers of paradise by their white faces, and the dwellers of hellfire by their black faces. And they will call out to the dwellers of paradise, Salamun alaykum, peace be upon you. And at that time they, i.e. the men of Al-A'raf, the people who are on this place called Al-A'raf, will not yet have entered paradise, but they will hope to enter it with certainty. And when their eyes will be turned towards the dwellers of the fire, they will say, "O our Lord, place us not with the people who are the zalimun, the wrongdoers and the polytheists." And the men on Al-A'raf, this place, this wall, will call unto the men whom they would recognize by their marks, saying, "Of what benefit to you were your great numbers, and hordes of wealth, and your arrogance against your faith? And they, those of whom swore that Allah would never show them mercy, behold, it was said to them, enter paradise, no fear shall be upon you, nor shall you grieve." So these are the ayats from Surah Al-A'raf, number 46 to 49, talking about the people who are going to be on this station of Al-A'raf, this place Al-A'raf. And these are the people whose good deeds were exactly the same as their bad deeds when they were measured in the weighing scale. So they go to this particular place, and they stand at this particular place for an amount of time, and then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, they will then enter paradise without going to the hellfire beforehand. So that's the third group. The next issue is, are there any people who will not have the weighing scale, whose deeds will not be balanced? They'll go through that stage like automatically, as we say. They'll go through without having the weighing scale done to them, without having their deeds balanced. One group of the scholars, they said that those people who have no accountability, there were certain people who don't have accountability, the 70,000 for example, who don't have any accountability. Some scholars said those people who don't have the accountability, then similarly the weighing scale isn't done for them. Their deeds aren't shown to them on the weighing scale because there's no need, there's no accountability for them, and the weighing scale is one aspect of the accountability, so therefore there'll be no weighing scale for them either, and they'll enter the paradise directly without the weighing scale. And this is what one group of the scholars they said. Other scholars, they said that this isn't the case, and this is the stronger opinion, that everyone will have the weighing scale done to them. Everyone will have their deeds and their actions and things all placed in front of the weighing scale in order to see what their goods and their bads were. And even those people who were exempt from the accountability, even they will have their deeds balanced for them to see. And the evidence is from the Quran. The ayat that we mentioned before, يَوْمَ يَكُونُ النَّاسُ كَالْفَرَاشِ الْمَبْثُوثِ وَتَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالْإِحْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ فَأَمَّا مَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ. These ayat in Al-Qari'ah, they're talking about, it says, the first ayat says, يَوْمَ يَكُونُ النَّاسِ. النَّاسِ. النَّاسِ in Arabic is general to everybody. النَّاسِ is the people. All of the people. There's no exemption made anywhere. No one has ever exempted anybody from the balance. The 70,000 is being mentioned clearly in the hadith that they are exempt from the accountability, the hisab. But no one has ever made them exempt specifically in any narration from the balance. And so the ayah in the Quran says, An-Nas, all of the people. So they said, okay, all of the people, therefore they are going to have the balance as well. And the exemptment is only from the accountability which came specifically in the hadith. But then the question arises, if they've got no accountability, they're going to go to paradise. Or for example, the messengers and the prophets who don't have any evil deeds, then what's the point of doing the balance for those people anyway? What's the point of doing the balance for their prophets, for example? who don't have any bad deeds, 100% good deeds, and the small errors that they fell into, they made tawbah from them before they died. The answer is to because this will be a way of honoring that person and Taqweem, like honoring that person. This is like to honor that person. It's like, for example, when a person gets the people who don't have any evil deeds, the point of measuring them and putting their deeds on the weighing scale is to show that person's virtue, to show that person's virtue, and to show his to honor that person, because when the weighing scale is done for him, it will be 100% down on the good side. So that person will physically be able to see his good deeds in front of him. So this is ennobling that person, showing him that these are your good deeds that you've done, that he'll see his scale totally heavy on the good side. So to honor that person and to show that person his virtue and how good he was in his lifetime, to physically show him by putting his deeds on the good side and showing how heavy it goes on the good side. That's the purpose of weighing those people who had good deeds only. The final issue is the kuffar. Are the kuffar going to have their deeds measured or weighed on the weighing scale? There are three opinions about the kuffar. The first opinion is that the kuffar will also have their deeds placed on the weighing scale, and they will be measured as well. And that again is the same evidence as before, because the ayah Al-Qari'ah says يَوْمَ يَكُونُ النَّاسِ. An-nas includes everybody, includes the Muslimin and the kuffar, everyone. The ayah is general, an-nas. An-nas, it doesn't exclude the kuffar. Kuffar are included within the word of an-nas. So they said the generality of the ayah includes the kuffar, and therefore the kuffar will also have their deeds weighed on the Day of Judgment. That's the first opinion, and the evidence is that the generality of the ayah doesn't exclude anybody. The second opinion is that they are not going to have their deeds weighed. The kuffar will not have their deeds weighed, and they use the ayah which we used previously before concerning the hadith, that when that big, heavy, strong man is brought on the Day of Judgment, and then on the scale he weighs nothing. He has nothing in terms of his deeds. And the ayah in the Quran is Surah Al-Kahf, ayah 105. Surah Al-Kahf, ayah 105. أولئك الذين كفروا بآيات ربهم ولقائه فحبطت أعمالهم فلا نقيم لهم يوم القيامة وزنا. That they are the ones who disbelieved in our ayat, in the verses of their Lord, and in meeting Him. So their deeds were destroyed, their deeds were fallen, there was nothing left of their deeds. And فلا نقيم لهم يوم القيامة وزنا. We won't give them any weight on the Day of Judgment. So they use this ayah. We won't give them any weight, we won't give them any substance on the Day of Judgment. So they use this ayah to say that the kuffar, so this group of scholars, that the kuffar, they won't be weighed. Their deeds won't be weighed on the weighing scale. The third opinion is a detail between the two. Some of them, they said that the ones who had no good deeds at all, they had just kufr, pure disbelief and kufr, no good deeds whatsoever, then those people, they won't be weighed. Because they've got nothing, they've got total disbelief and kufr. They'll just be taken directly to the hellfire. But the ones who had some good deeds from the kuffar, even for example moving something out of the way, there's something dangerous in the road, kafir comes along and moves it out of the way so other people aren't harmed by this thing in the road. That's a good deed from the kafir. Any of these things that the kafir did which were good deeds, then the kuffar who had these good deeds, or for example the Shaykh mentioned Silatul Rahim, that he keeps good links with his people and his relatives, and he behaves with them well. These are things which are good. Then those kind of kuffar will be given the weighing as well, to show their evil deeds, but also to show these one or two good deeds that they had. So, but this third opinion is not a very strong opinion, as they said, because a kafir with disbelief, none of his good deeds will benefit him. As long as the kafir doesn't have tawheed, then these other deeds, as some of the scholars said, they won't benefit him on the weighing scale on the other side, because he never had the tawheed in the first place. And there's a hadith with this kind of meaning: the kafir who doesn't have tawheed with him, it doesn't matter how many good deeds he does, it's not going to benefit him in any way. But there were scholars who said that maybe as a consequence of these good deeds, his status in hellfire will be lightened. So a kafir who has pure kufr and disbelief and disobedience is not as bad as somebody who had kufr and disobedience but used to do good things in his life. That's what some of them said. But the stronger opinion appears to be that the kuffar, even if they did good deeds in their lifetime, as the scholars have said, they'll get the reward for that during their lifetime. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them make things easy for them, or give them some reward during the lifetime, so there'll be nothing left for them on the Day of Judgment. So these good deeds of theirs won't count for anything. So the opinion is, the stronger opinion is the first opinion, that the kuffar, just like everybody else, will be weighed, and not making any differentiation between the one who has pure kufr and the one who has kufr, but he also has good deeds with it to go with it. Then the question here comes, what's the point of weighing the kuffar? If the kuffar have got no tawheed and they're going to go to hellfire anyway, what's the point of weighing their deeds and showing them on the weighing scale? And this is the opposite to the previous question, and the answer here is to show firstly the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They can physically see in front of them how their evil deeds weigh down on the evil side of the weighing scale. They can physically see that, so it shows the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It also shows their humiliation, to humiliate them because of the kufr they used to have in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts their deeds in the weighing scale, and their evil side, the evil deeds weigh down heavily. It's a humiliation for those people. And also, those two, leave it at those two. So these are the two reasons why the deeds of the kuffar will be weighed. To show the justice of Allah, that the kuffar can see their evil deeds heavily weighed down, and to humiliate the kuffar as a humiliation for them. And that's the end of the section concerning the weighing scales. And the next topic next time will be the hawd. The hawd, or where the water is, the pond of the Prophet ﷺ. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح